Her name was Alice, a short, white Wisconsin girl with wavy brown hair and an ever-present Packers jacket. She liked pad thai and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. She gushed over black and white movies. She couldn't dance if her life depended on it, and she caused one of the most terrifying years of my life. Whoops, am I right? I was heading to this weekly improv show, but my friend, whom I usually hang out with, was out of town, so I posted an open invite on a university Facebook group. I got exactly one response, from this random girl, Alice, but my socially awkward ass was all over it. She came to the show and we hit it off big time. Cue the coffee meetups, the Netflix binges, blah blah blah. We started dating. Life was pretty good for a while. Then came the first messages. A lovely series of blurbs from a man named Eric. His profile picture was a skinny guy in thick-rimmed glasses with a hoodie and a beanie, his tongue sticking out of his open smile. For now, what's important is this spattering of angry Facebook DMs I suddenly received from this man I had never met, detailing why I'm not a good boyfriend, and that I'm hurting Alice, and how I just don't understand her like he does. I was a bit annoyed, but mostly confused. I talked to Alice about it, but she just hand-waved it away. He's a jerk, she said. I don't hang out with him anymore. It wasn't the most satisfying explanation, but aggressively jealous guys aren't exactly an anomaly, so I just blocked him and thought that was the end of it. A few months passed by. Summer came and went. Alice had plans to study abroad, so when I came back to school, she was already halfway across the world. It was only a few months, I thought. No big deal. Over those next few months, though, I would become Facebook acquainted with a myriad of strange individuals. There was Leia. Her Facebook profile was just the ordinary Facebook silhouette icon. She sent an array of messages justifying Eric's anger, reiterating that my relationship with Alice was unhealthy and toxic, and that Alice and Eric had a much better history. She also included a blurry photo of a girl sitting on top of him making out with a skinny guy. Both of their faces were obscured, but Leia swore it was Alice and Eric from some time during the summer. Then there was Nick. Facebook pic was a guy on a skateboard in front of a sunset. He readily admitted that he had feelings for Alice, but made clear that neither he nor Eric had any right to be upset about her not being with them. He said that Leia and Eric were liars, and he'd try to set them straight. Relative to the others, he seemed semi-okay, but he let slip a few really bitter-sounding messages. He sounded like a loose cannon, always on edge. Then there was Hannah. A Facebook pic of two silhouetted girls in front of a sunset. She showed up after I blocked Leia. She claimed to be a childhood friend of Alice, and started the same old "your relationship is bad" bullshit. Chris. A Facebook pic of a white blonde boy in sunglasses. Very elusive. He would send one cryptic message every once in a blue moon, and he'd never reply to any of my messages. Mark as well. 2 pairs of feet, one male and female. He apologized for the actions of the others. He tried to fill me in on all of the group's dynamics and history. In the physical absence of Alice, he offered to meet me to talk. Like an idiot, I agreed. We set a time and place, but he never showed up and I never heard from him again. Then there was Sarah, and David after that. There were so many of them. This was all spread over a period of time. Usually I blocked or stopped hearing from one person before hearing from another. Digital harassment after digital harassment, with some vague threats sprinkled in. Meanwhile, Alice was extremely difficult to get a hold of. I chalked this up to vastly different time zones, but even when I did hear from her, she was especially dismissive of the whole subject. "I don't know what to do," she said. And then I got an accusation. One day she sends me the question, "Who's Mary?" I tell her the truth. I don't know who Mary is either. She sent me screenshots of texts she received from an unknown number. In them, the sender wrote that her name was Mary, and that she was in love with me. "He told me he loved me," Mary wrote. "He had sex with me, and now he's not called me back." If you feel like this story is rapidly losing focus, it's because it is. There were so many disparate things going on, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why this was happening to me. At that point, I was just about losing my mind. But this is where things get beyond crazy. I started to get texts from Mary. She asked why I hadn't called her. She asked if I meant what I had said to her. She told me she'd come to get me. She said she'd seen me on campus, here, there, at this event, at this particular time. And any time she said she'd seen me in a place in a particular time, I realized that I had actually been at that place. I started looking over my shoulder. I didn't know what I could do. I had no face, no name to report. And then I heard from Nick again. He said he'd found Mary, that he'd tried to talk to her, and she pulled a gun on him, but the situation was somehow resolved and she was now being put in treatment. And that's all I could squeeze out of him. I'm beyond confused at this point. I'm afraid. I call Alice and tell her I can't do this anymore. I had no clue what was going on, but I knew somehow all these people were involved, and I wanted no part of it. I cut off contact with her. And then suddenly, everything, the messages, the texts, the random people, it all stopped. A friend of mine realized something odd soon after. Barely any of Alice's friends had their faces on Facebook. We did some digging ourselves. Eric's pic was some photo off a Tumblr blog of cute nerds. The photo of Chris, the one of the white boy with sunglasses, was just an obscure photo of Justin Bieber. The photo of Nick, the skateboarder, was a stock photo, and Hannah's photo was art from a book ad. David was apparently a picture of a Korean pop singer. We also noticed something horrific. All of their profiles were created around the exact same time I had first met Alice. To this day, I don't understand why she did it. Fast forward 2 years. I get a text message from an unknown number. The number looks familiar, I think to myself. And then I realize it's Alice. The text consists of one word. Talk. I was telling a friend my story of once having a stalker, and she referred me to this forum. This happened years ago today, but still affects me to this day. I apologize for the length ahead in advance, but I feel like I have to tell the whole story. The summer after I graduated from high school, I was still living at home. I was up late one night and was packing for a camping trip with my friends. It was unbelievably hot, and had the window open as I sat in folded clothes. It was around 2 in the morning, and the next thing I knew, there was a hand coming through the gap in the screen of my window. I screamed, and the hand flew back out. I was stunned, but there was a part of me that wondered if this was my younger brother pranking me. I got up and looked out the window, and saw the figure of a man staring back at me. I ran into my brother's room where he was playing video games. We called the police, who came and searched the area, but they found nothing, warned me and my parents to lock the windows and doors, and left. We were all still shaken up, and my mom had a feeling that he would come back. Turns out her mother's intuition was right. She waited outside and waited on our back porch. After 20 minutes or so, she saw a man dressed in all black slink into our backyard along the tree line. There wasn't a fence on that side, unfortunately. He hid behind a tree for a few moments, and ran to another and hid there, slowly working his way up towards my window. My mother yelled something at him, and he took off running as fast as he could. The police came back out again, but found no trace of him. I never opened that window again, not even the curtains. My parents installed some motion-detecting lights, and with that, it seemed to be the end of that. About 6 months later, my friend and I got an apartment downtown together. We were really excited because this was our first place of our own. The apartment wasn't exactly the best quality, but it was so fun to be living in the city. The downside was that it was street parking only. After a few weeks, though, my car was broken into. Nothing was taken but a single rose sat on the passenger seat. It was creepy, but I vowed to be vigilant and safe. I always tried to get a spot close to the entrance near the lights, but often it was difficult to get those spots, and I would have to park farther away on darker streets. Things began escalating at this point. My car started being broken into at least once a week. Most of the time a flower was left, which I always threw on the ground, but once a pair of men's underwear even was left. Even more creepily, once a bag of Tootsie Rolls, as they were my favorite candy. This made me wonder if the person doing this knew me personally, and I started to become suspicious of everyone. There was a laundry machine in the basement of the apartment, and one day I went down to get a load that had finished drying. As I started to fold, I realized that all of my undergarments, bras, and panties were gone. Another week I had a male friend over from school, and when he went to leave, his tires had gotten slashed during the visit. By the time the first letter arrived, I had already started making plans to move elsewhere. This letter described a love for me that had been going on for years. He noted things that proved he had been watching me very closely. I was able to arrange another friend to take over for my lease, and I moved in with another friend on the opposite side of the city. It was a secured building, and had an underground parking garage that was only accessible to tenants. I felt much more secure, and the extra money spent was well worth the peace of mind. Things were quiet for a few months, but then my roommate got a boyfriend. Most of us were wary of Ashley's new boyfriend from the beginning. For one, they had met on MySpace after he reached out to her. Another reason was that the new boyfriend, Matt, was extremely good-looking, and while Ashley was a wonderful person, she just wasn't the type you would typically expect someone like him to date. Ashley was thrilled. She had never had a boyfriend and really felt like he was her Prince Charming. I, though, thought he was weird and creepy from the beginning. Matt was on the quiet side, and always seemed to be sporting an uncomfortable, leering smile. It was difficult to carry on a conversation with him, because he would always make these weird and random comments on facts that were completely unrelated to what we were talking about. I deleted my MySpace when the initial stalking began, but I created a dummy account to learn more about Matt. It didn't look like he really knew any of his friends in real life. There were only pictures of himself, and the rest of the information was very vague. My friends and I gently tried to discourage her from seeing Matt. He technically hadn't done anything wrong, but he was just so strange. She would immediately get defensive and would shut the conversation down. Matt started to spend more time at the apartment, and I found myself finding any excuse I could to avoid coming home. One day I came home from work and found Matt on my couch alone, drinking a beer. Ashley had been called into work, and she had told him we could just hang out. I was furious with her, because I didn't want to spend any time with him, so I grabbed a beer and a snack and headed off to my room and shut the door. After about 30 minutes or so, he knocked on my door and suggested we watch some TV and get to know each other better, because we both loved Ashley. I didn't want to, but decided that maybe I needed to just give him a chance. He put on a movie, and I tried to focus on it because I didn't want to talk. At one point, I glanced over at Matt and found that he was just staring at me with a weird smile on his face. I snapped a "what" at him, and he continued smiling and just said, "I can't believe it." "Believe what?" I asked. He said nothing, and went back to watching the movie, still smiling. I had no idea what he was talking about. but for some reason the interaction made every hair stand up on my body. I excused myself and locked the door to my room. Another month or so went on, and I had managed to avoid being home for much of anything beyond sleep and showering. Matt practically lived there now, and even brought a bunch of his things into Ashley's room. I didn't want to move again, but I was beginning to look for other options at this point. On their 6-month anniversary, I saw a huge bouquet of flowers on the table, and an already open card propped up next to it. I rolled my eyes and was about to leave, when I decided to see what that weirdo had wrote for her. When I opened the card, my heart started beating through my chest. Without even reading the words he wrote, I was shaking. The handwriting was exactly the same as the one my stalker had sent. I had kept them as evidence, and dug them out of my desk for comparison. The handwriting was unique and identical. Matt was the stalker. I called the police first. As they were on the way, I called Ashley and asked her to come over. She was at work, but said she would be there when she could. I was terrified to tell her, because I knew she would be shattered. The police took a statement from me, and actually went to Ashley's work to get more information from her, and they ended up breaking the news. Apparently, Ashley called Matt and left a furious message, even though the cops told her not to say anything, and he completely disappeared after that. There was no Matt, nor anyone matching his resemblance at the place he said he worked. Ashley had never been to his apartment, because he had been staying with friends while trying to save money for a trip to Europe. His family lived out of state, and she had never met a friend of his because he claimed they had had a falling out because he was choosing to spend too much time with Ashley. It was all lies in the end. She was dating a stranger. We don't even think Matt was his real name. The cherry on top of this whole thing was when we went through Matt's things. He had left everything when he had disappeared suddenly, and Ashley and I decided to go through it all. There was a duffel bag that was full of gym clothes, but in one of the compartments, there were about 10 photos of me. All were taken from far away, with the exception of one being me while I was sleeping. The sheets were current, so I know it had to have been at the current apartment before I started locking my bedroom door. A few pictures dated back to before the incident at my parents' house, which made us link that it was him as well. My pair of missing underwear were there, and I shudder to think of what he did with the rest. A Starbucks lid with my red lipstick marks, a necklace I hadn't even noticed was missing, a few other random sick souvenirs. The police never tracked him down. I decided to accept an opportunity overseas that I had been considering, and got the hell out of there. Unfortunately, Ashley and I quickly drifted apart. She had a really hard time accepting that her first love was a complete psycho. I think I had some underlying anger, maybe misplaced, for believing all of his lies and letting him into our lives. I don't know what his endgame was. Would he have tried to hurt me? Or was he simply content with being in my world? I'll never know. Being stalked changes you. And even when I lived across the world, I looked over my shoulder everywhere I went. I still have no social media accounts attached to my real name. I'm married with children, and know that he must have moved on to torment some other poor woman. But every time I visit my hometown, I'm tense and keep a low profile. Part of me will always worry that Matt will someday resurface again. It was winter of 2015, and I was working in a doctor's office in Branson, Missouri. I had just gotten a new iPhone, and was excited to try out the time-lapse mode for its camera. On my drive home from work one early evening, I decided to stop and capture the sunset over Table Rock Lake. It was a gorgeous evening, and the winter sun would be setting soon. I parked my SUV at a state park entry point parking lot, and mine was the only car in sight. But that didn't really alarm me. I hopped out and realized how incredibly chilly it was. It was sunny, but blisteringly cold. I opened the back of my vehicle and put some gloves on and a better pair of shoes. Then I took off down a trail that led to the edge of the lake. I'd noticed the Branson Belle showboat slowly making its way across the lake for its sunset voyage, and I thought it'd be neat to capture it in the time-lapse. I was a single 31-year-old female, with a lifetime of experience doing risky things on my own without consequence. The path down to the water was marked with large rocks on each side. I was in a hurry to get down to the shore and get into recording position. I lost my footing and fell down hard. My head rested on a pointy-shaped big rock that I think would have knocked me out had I not managed to literally stop the impact at the moment we collided. My knee and one of my hands stung badly. It suddenly hit me how stupid this was, because no one knew where I was, and I had nearly incapacitated myself on a vacant trail in freezing temperatures, with it being minutes from dark nonetheless. As I sat there recovering from my fall, I decided I was close enough to the shore that I'd just film right there where I fell. I was soon about to find out that falling down was the least of my worries that night. "Hey, can I borrow a light?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned and there he was. He was standing about 20 feet behind me. I replied to him that I was sorry, but I didn't have a lighter because I didn't smoke. "I saw you getting out of your car up there. You have a real nice ass." Where had you been? There seriously wasn't a soul in sight when I parked and headed down the trail. This next part you might find hard to believe, because I myself can still not grasp that there are people out there like this, but his fourth sentence to me, within less than a minute of appearing, was, "Do you want to fuck?" I knew I was in a lot of trouble. No one would hear me if I were to scream. Sure, the Branson Belle was out in the water, but it was several football field lengths away, and I'm sure I was invisible to them. They wouldn't hear me over the sounds of the massive ship anyhow. Without missing a beat, I told him it was too cold to do it outside, and we should go to my car to do it. I pretended to be interested. In my mind, I knew I just needed to get off this trail before the sun went down, and obviously I'd abandoned capturing the sunset at this point. I don't recall all the things he said during the walk to the parking lot, but he asked if he could touch my butt during the walk, and I happily agreed. I knew it was a test. I still wasn't 100% sure he was going to let me make it off the trail, and anything I could do or say to please him on that walk was my ticket out. How had I gotten myself into this awful situation? God, I was stupid. Just please let me make it out of this, and I swear I'll be smarter next time. He kept his hand on the back of my pants for the rest of the walk. We made it to the parking lot, but much to my disappointment, I was still the only car there other than a vehicle that hadn't parked in a real spot and hadn't been there earlier. I knew it was this man's car. He had been hiding somewhere and watching me, and then he'd pulled up the trail entrance and left his car at it before he began to follow me. You may ask why I didn't call 911 on the trail. Well, he was watching my every move, and I wanted to make it off the trail unharmed and alive. I figured it being below freezing was a good excuse to refuse to do what he wanted to do there on the trail, but please him by promising to do it somewhere warmer. Unfortunately, the parking lot was far enough off the regular highway that passing cars couldn't see it. My next mission was to make it to my own vehicle and escape. We were standing by his car, and he continued saying the things that he was going to do to me that seem a bit too graphic for me to write about here. I was still trying to play along. I tried to get his name and number out of him, but he refused on both. Why would someone refuse to give you even their name? He began unzipping his pants and trying to get me to do things to him, so I insisted we walk to my SUV. First, though, he grabbed something out of his car. I never got a good look at it, but I'm pretty sure it was a handgun. We walked across the parking lot towards my car. I pushed on lock, knowing that only pushing it once would only unlock the driver's side door. I had my keys in ready position. I jumped in as he was attempting to open the passenger door. I threw it in reverse and backed up as the tires spun on loose gravel. Then I put it into drive and floored it as hard as I could. I was too afraid to look behind me in the rearview mirror. I called 911 and gave them his description. Oddly enough, he was a handsome enough guy. Stood at around 6 foot tall, blonde hair, brown eyes, medium to fair skin, a slightly muscular build and nice features. Probably around 25 to 30 years old. You wouldn't look at him and think he was anything remarkable or otherwise. I wasn't ever in a position to see his license plate, but I told them about his car. He drove an older, probably early 90s pale blue car. It reminded me of my great-grandmother's Oldsmobile. I didn't even have a first name to give them. After taking down my information, I never heard from anyone regarding my report again. I may never know what exactly he's done, but I do know that I sensed the presence of an absolute evil that evening.